all. Bills can win it here. White puts it down. The kick is on the way, and it is good. And the Bills have won it. The Bills have won it. The Bills have won it. They win it 41-38. Incredible. What a comeback by the Bills.
Jacksonville's perfect record on the line right here.
They put in Williams as the fullback, and he scores a touchdown, the 12th year defensive tackle.
And the fans are all over the field. Incredible. This place is pandemonium.
Welcome to the first episode of Disguise Coverage in the new year, 2021. I guess it's also the only episode of Disguise Coverage in the year 2021, but semantics, that's fine. I am Anthony, your host here on Disguise Coverage. Thank you very much for joining us here in the new year. And if you picked up on that little detail, I did say us. And the reason I said us is because much like last week's super show of Disguise Coverage, I am not alone here on this episode, this pioneering episode here in 2021. I have Greg Tompsett here from the Cover One team, co-host of the Cover One Buffalo Sports Podcast. Greg, how you doing?
Doing well, man. Happy New Year. It's a lot of fun. We're able to actually hang out with family. So my wife and kids are at my in-laws having a sleepover for New Year's, and I'm a bachelor for the night. So I ate leftover pizza and watched movies all day.
I saw your tweets. I saw one of your tweets earlier of like, oh, how my New Year's Day is going. And it was like tweets, eat leftover pizza, movie, tweets, movie. And I was like, wow, he's having the greatest day.
It's delightful.
It's awesome. I did a podcast earlier today with the Buff Hub over on Buffalo Rumblings, and then got ready for our work tonight. Watched a little bit of college football. Pretty much things happened how I thought they were going to happen. I didn't think Notre Dame was playing with Alabama.
Because I was real sure how the game was going to work out. I rewatched Avengers Infinity War, and when we're done, I'm going to go watch Endgame. It's going to be great.
Oh, that's pretty sweet. I went in opposite direction with movies. I watched the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze for the first time today.
Okay, I dig that. Every once in a while, I have those moments where I'm like, everybody talks about this movie, and I've never seen it, like whatever that one might be, and I'll throw those in every once in a while. I've done a run lately of like favorite movies I hadn't watched in a while. I did both Godfathers, I did Goodfellas, I did all the Christopher Nolan Batmans. I've done a couple of those kind of things, just stuff like favorite movies I hadn't seen in a bit, and just running through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good way to go. With moving to Buffalo, we have Fios now, and I'm still trying to figure out how the channels work. And I came across Ghost, and I was like, oh. And then the wife was like, you've never seen Ghost? And I was like, no. And then I made a couple of Nobody Puts Baby in the Corner jokes about Patrick Swayze, and then we ended up watching it. So that was my day. And that's what this episode is going to be about. We're going to talk about movies. We're going to talk about Ghost. This is a Patrick Swayze podcast. So, of course, here we are. But thank you for joining us, everybody out there, whether you're watching live or watching the video stream or listening on one of the audio-only platforms. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Disguise Coverage and joining myself and Greg. Oh, you already got a comment there going on. Godfather's great. Godfather is great. Good call. Well, go Bills. We got that early as well. And we got another. I can't believe your wife and children left you on New Year's. You must be very sad.
It's disaster. I'm trying about it. Like, no, I'm serious. I wear a Buffalo Bills wedding ring. I'm married to the Bills. She was tired of it. Yeah, she was tired of it.
Married to the Mafia. You had to pick one, and you have to pick the one that's most important, which is the Bills. And that's a perfect segue into what we're going to be getting into this week. And the reason Greg has the Bills in his life and I have the Bills in my life, I mean, we always do, but this year is a little better than most to have the Bills in our lives because they have reached this pretty – I don't want to get ahead of myself because I am superstitious, but they have reached a pretty decent, I guess to undersell it, level of success so far this year. And next week at this time, we will be thinking about the wild card matchup that the Bills have in the first round. But as of now, that situation is still a little murky as the Bills head into Week 17 with their matchup against the Miami Dolphins. And looking at the potential playoff scenarios for the Buffalo Bills in wild card weekend, There are 32 possible scenarios for the Buffalo Bills in Wild Card Weekend. 6 of those scenarios end with the Bills facing the Miami Dolphins. 12 of those scenarios end with the Baltimore Ravens. 8 of those scenarios end with the Cleveland Browns, and then 3 for the Indianapolis Colts, 3 for the Tennessee Titans. And what Greg and I are going to be doing here in this episode is talking about each matchup, pros and cons of each, likelihood, kind of how that would shake out and what it would mean and how we go forward. And we're going to start here with the Miami Dolphins just because we play them here in Week 17. They are an AFC East rival. And I guess we'll start with the whole resting starter scenario. It's been a thing on social media. It's been a thing on the radio. If you live here in Buffalo, you heard it on GR over the entire week. Should the Bills rest their starters? Should they go hard for the 2 seed? Greg, what are your thoughts on that regards to resting starters, going hard, playing everybody? What are your thoughts?
So it's hard because everything in me says momentum matters, continuing the hot run matters. It makes me question, if the most important thing is being the hottest team going into the playoffs, do you lose some of that? Like, I think all those things are real. So when people come at me, because I'll tell you the but here in a second, that when people come at me, I get it. I get why. But none of that matters if you have a stupid thing happen. So think about the emotions that you felt when in the fourth quarter with Matt Barkley throwing the ball up 38-9
with 10 minutes left,
Cole Beasley got hurt. And it was like, oh yeah, I kind of wanted him to get 33 more yards too and to get 1,000, and that would have been cool. And then, so just think about that emotion, but think about it with a scarier name attached to it or anyone else that we don't want to lose. So I want to win the game. I want to do everything we can to win the game. I don't want any of our important players to play a great deal of time. So I've kind of found a hedge for me in that I want to have them take the practice reps. I want them to go through all the different things in the week that they normally would, which is scary in itself for anybody that didn't hear. David Bakhtiari tore his freaking ACL for the Packers in practice. Like, it's
a great year.
Like, bad stuff happens in football sometimes. It's a collision sport. Scary stuff happens. So I want them to go through all that. I want them to go through the game planning. I want them to go through the pregame warm-ups. I want them to come out. I don't mind if they get a drive or two. I wouldn't mind Josh Allen having a drive or two with John Brown to have just a couple plays to get back into the rhythm, then take them out. Hopefully we score a couple touchdowns, get a little bit of a lead, hand it off to everybody else, put them on ice. Anyone who's remotely dinged, anyone who's rehabbing anything, anyone who has any legitimate reason at all should all be sitting. So I'd like to hedge. I'd like to find a little bit of both. It makes it easier for me to do that, hearing that the Steelers are sitting Ben Roethlisberger and multiple of their starters, because if they lose, it doesn't really matter what happens in our game. We get to get the rest and keep the 2 seed. So I think the 2 seed matters. I want to win. I kind of think we can do both by resting our guys too.
Man, this is going to be short work because I pretty much agree with everything you said. My main governing thought with going into Week 17 here is, and being the 2 and being the 3, like you, I would much rather be the 2 seed. I want that. Just knowing the fact that, okay, it doesn't matter who else potentially wins in Wild Card Weekend, we get another home game minimum. I want that. I want to know that. But when push comes to shove, I would much rather be a healthy 3 seed than a banged up and wounded 2 seed.
And one other little seed to plant. If the Steelers get upset in the first round, we are the 2 seed. We are the second highest remaining seed. We would get all the same things we would normally get. We would still host the second round game. So for a lot of people who are kind of expecting the Steelers to get upset, if they get upset in the opening round, we are the 2 seed anyways, and it's basically the same thing.
Yep, there you go, and it's all gravy. And to your point, and Aaron Quinn from Cover One in the chat here mentioned a good piece on Wes Welker when he got hurt for the Pats in Week 17 some years ago. Just some injury like that can genuinely derail your season, whether it's on field or just like the off the field aspect of it, of like somebody knowing like, oh my, like the team just feeling, oh my God, this guy went down. Should we have even been playing? Did coach make the right decision? I don't want any of that drama.
Yeah.
I don't want
it plants a seed I don't want planted.
1,000%. I don't want the physical aspect of it, of now we have to miss a guy in the field. I'm still in my own head of last year of thinking of all the potential avenues and possibilities of what maybe the playoff game somehow ends up different if Levi Wallace is out there in that game because he doesn't get hurt against the Jets in week 17. I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze if we come out and it's really like we have to get the 2, we have to get the 2. I would much rather be a healthy 3 than a banged up 2. The health is the most important thing, especially with how the Bills are operating and how they're running at this point. And based off of that, we'll stick with Miami. If we were to see Miami in the first round of the playoffs here, how do you feel about that matchup? Likes, dislikes, confident? I mean, I think we are to a decent degree. And what are your overall thoughts with that?
So first, for people who will be watching tomorrow, and like me, many of you guys are going to be doing Red Zone or other games, a lot of scoreboard watching, and obviously watching our Bills. The scenario where we end, the most common one, where we play the Dolphins, I know you laid out quite a few of them, is the biggest pieces are the Ravens beat the Bengals, the Steelers beat the Browns, and the Bills beat the Dolphins. So those ones all kind of happening in that manner. I'm counting that the Titans win later, the Colts win later. There may be a couple things that can pivot that if somehow Jacksonville upset the Colts, but I'm assuming that's not likely. But if the Bills beat the Dolphins and the Steelers beat the Browns, those are the 2 most likely ones that would flip-flop. All the rest of the 10-plus point spread ones would stay where they are. We would play the Dolphins. If we do, I kind of like the idea of, we got to rest a lot of people. They had to go all out. We got to play vanilla and keep things close to the vest. They had to show their cards. They have to fly and travel from Miami to Buffalo in back-to-back weeks. They're a team that they have a very good defense. I think their defense is as good as any in the AFC. I think that their defense is playing as well as Pittsburgh right now with how Pittsburgh is banged up. Pittsburgh at full health is better than them, but Pittsburgh without Devin Bush and Dupree and all the other pieces they're missing and on and off Joe Hayden. I think the Finns' defense is as good as the Colts and the Ravens and those guys. Their offense is okay. Like, it's not concerning. Out of the playoff teams, it's probably the worst of the playoff team offenses. They're not the worst offense in the league, but they're the worst of the playoff teams. Yep. So it'd be one of those games where I'd expect it to be, kind of close early, and eventually we'd crack enough plays that we'd put up points and end up scoring, I think, beating them comfortably by double digits. I just don't think they could keep up eventually, and that Tua hasn't shown the ability to do that. And if they put in Fitz, I would count on them to get more points and more turnovers. So I think it would be fine either way. They would be my preferred option, but I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to impact any game planning or strategy. But if I could choose, I would choose to play them.
That's fair. And I echo those sentiments, especially with regards to the offense. And looking at Miami's offense, they are 23rd in the NFL in yards per drive. They're 17th in points per drive. They're 25th. This was a big one for me. They're 25th in the league in plays per drive on offense. They only average 6 plays per offensive drive. Arguably, their best offensive player down the stretch has been their kicker, Jason Sanders. They've got a
he is pretty badass too.
Yeah, I had him on my fantasy team. He just kept nailing 50-yarders. And then they're a little banged up too. We think, or what it looks like, Preston Williams might be done for the year. Devontae Parker has been battling a hamstring injury. Gesicki, who's a phenomenal receiving tight end, he came back last week, but his shoulders a little. They
probably would have loved to get a former receiver back to go help them for that stretch run.
Man, crazy. Somebody who
used to play for them and is a really good deep threat and was available.
Yeah, who's still really fast. I don't know who that would be.
I rubbed that into a few Dolphins fans.
Good.
They're going to be rolling out some practice squad guy, and we're going to add Kenny Stills as our 6th receiver just for fun.
Just to be we don't need you, just sit on our bench.
Hang out just in case.
Just whatever. And then if we need to bring you in and you're really good, 95 Madden speed, we will. But maybe not. It's fine. Yeah, I'm not. The only thing that has me hesitant in potentially playing Miami for a third time, although technically if we rest starters in week 17,
I think
it's kind of be it's a halftime, or maybe it's 2.5 times playing them, or 2. But Aaron mentioned it in the chat here. I don't like the idea of playing a team 3 times in a year. That makes me a little nervous. But other than that, and I am superstitious, so I feel like I'm jinxing it, but I don't fear the matchup. Even with their defense, I recognize what their defense has done. First in the NFL in points per game and the turnovers that they've generated. I recognize the year that Xavier Howard is having, leading the league.
He's legit.
Phenomenal. He's in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. I believe also if he gets to his 10th interception, I think that's the first. I wish I remember this stat. Like the last time a corner or anybody has had double-digit interceptions in an NFL season has been a very, very long time.
If I recall it right, I heard it referenced in a show that I pumped up that was on the Athletic Football Podcast. They did their All-Pro show, and on their Darius, used to be a corner and has his own show. He talked about it, and I think it was like 13 years ago, and it was Antonio Cromartie. Was
there
the
you
last
go.
one to have double-digit interceptions.
When he was with the Chargers, right?
Yeah, because he was talking about that no defensive back has had 10 interceptions in 13 years, and he mentioned that the last one was Antonio Cromartie.
Which is a crazy stat to think of, and so I recognize what they do. The majority of their defense, they play
Darius Butler. It was hurt.
There you go. I see it in the
Darius
chat there.
Butler.
Thank you, Liam. Ooh, shout out to Liam. He threw it out there, Darius Butler. Appreciate you, Liam. Yeah, they play a lot of cover 1 and cover 3. That's the majority of what they are in their pass coverage. And I recognize a lot of defenses play that, but that doesn't scare me with what the Bills can do, with what Stephon Diggs can do, with how we can attack the middle of the field. I'm not tremendously fearful of that matchup. It's close to me for my preferred matchup. It's close along with playing Cleveland and Indianapolis. Basically, as long as we don't play Baltimore, I'm pretty much fine. But this is an interesting one if we were to play them again. It would be nice to, for them to get in the playoffs for the first time in a long time, and then for us to just bounce them right away and be like, no.
So the only scenario we play them is if we beat them. If Miami beats us in just about any scenario, they're a higher seed than where we would be.
Correct.
And so that means if the only way we play them is if we're playing them and have already beaten them twice. I love the idea of beating them 3 times in a season and of not only sweeping the division, but having 7 division wins in one season. That's a fun little thing to have and to throw around, that next year we go in and we're 7-0 in the division. That's a fun little nugget.
I feel like people will be like, but there's only 6 games. And we're like, we're counting the playoff game. And we're counting it, and we're going to rub it in your faces because we would like to do that. Yeah, it's an intriguing matchup. I don't think I've seen some of the comments coming through. We shouldn't be scared of playing Miami 3 times, and I think that's just the only caveat. But I don't think it's a matchup that we go into like, oh my goodness, we have to play Miami.
And I'll preface this. I could have made you a little recording that said, yeah, they have a pretty good run game and a decent defense, but I'm not concerned about it, and we're going to beat them anyways. And then you just could hit play on like 6 of these teams. Because it's basically the same thing. Like, oh, they have a pretty good run game and a pretty good defense, but they don't have anybody that can cover our receivers, and we're going to outscore them, so I'm not really all that concerned. And just said that over and over again because it pretty much applies to all these first-round teams.
To a pretty decent amount. And another great segue from you, Greg, as we move on to the Baltimore Ravens, the team who has the majority of the scenarios that we mentioned earlier. So, again, 32 potential playoff first-round matchup scenarios for the Bills. 12 of them are with the Baltimore Ravens. The biggest one, and I guess the most likely out of the ones I've seen, if the Bills lose to Miami and everyone else wins, meaning the Steelers win their game against Cleveland, the Colts win their game, the Ravens win their game, and Tennessee wins their game, that would end up with the Bills playing Baltimore in the first round. This is the one matchup for me. I recognize how Baltimore has played this year, but I always think of everything in a one-off type of scenario, and if everybody brings their A game, Baltimore is the one team in this first round where if they bring their A game and we bring our A game, I think that's the biggest hurdle the Bills would have to overcome. That running game is still lethal. Lamar is so electric, and they just have so much talent that I feel like it could rear its head in some point. They are the one matchup out of all these first-round teams that I'm the most hesitant to be like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. I have to pause a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's something to them being the hot team. It's kind of hard because they've also played a really iffy schedule. Their hot run has been against Dallas, Cincinnati, Jacksonville, the Giants, a shootout with the Browns. So it's not like they're blowing out good teams, and the best team they played, the Browns, also put up 42 points on them. So I get it that they're hot. I get it. Lamar Jackson's a concern. If he had and recaptured some crazy game, I'm as afraid, him or Derrick Henry are the 2 guys who, out of any of the opponents we could play, where I'm like, they have a chance to just have one of those superhuman playoff performances that could concern you. Yeah. But overall, they haven't been great. We've had a great recipe. Lamar Jackson's worst game of the year last year was against the Bills. They have a good recipe to be able to control him and to keep things under control. And I don't think they have the secondary to keep up with our receivers is the biggest piece of it. That I think they have a chance with what our run defense has shown in the past, although it's been better in the second half by quite a bit. Even if they put up some points, I just don't think they could keep up. And I think eventually we'd outscore them. I think that they'd put up as many points as anybody against us, but I don't see them having the ability to slow down what our receivers can do. So, I don't know that I want to play them, but I'm not concerned. I wouldn't be concerned with playing them and with being able to go up against them. I would feel very comfortable being able to take it to Baltimore. And I think the couple scenarios there is if, like I said, if Miami beats us or if the Bills win and the Bengals upset the Ravens, which would be a funny way to play them is crazy, right? to go into that path, which after the last couple things we've seen, I just watched the Jets win back-to-back games, so nothing is off the table. Nothing is off the table. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, it's a team in Baltimore that I feel like I saw a comment. I don't remember where on the old interwebs that I saw that Baltimore is having the season that Baltimore is having this year is the season that people thought Baltimore would have last year. And they've underachieved to a degree. I also think what's happened with their offensive line has really affected their entire offense as a whole. No Marshall Yanda, and then Ronnie Stanley goes down for the year. They've been shuffling and mixing and matching. Orlando Brown, the regular right tackle, had to move to left. He's held up decently enough, but he hasn't really anchored that like Ronnie Stanley.
He's not the same athlete Stanley is.
No, Stanley turned out to be a really great pick. And their defense, for as formidable it is on the defensive line, and I guess at the corner position, Humphrey and Peters are a nice one too. Their safeties are nowhere near the level that they need to be, especially to complement the rest of that defense. It was talked about throughout the offseason, especially when they drafted Queen from LSU, and it was like, oh my goodness, the speed in that coverage unit and the coverage unit. They kept talking about the coverage, but the safeties have very much been a liability in coverage for them, and even in the run support aspect to a degree. But their ability to, if they get hot, and with what the Bills have struggled with, again, the only worry I have for the defense is that running game defense. And if Baltimore gets cooking, that's the only thing that worries me a bit. But because their passing game, other than Mark Andrews, nobody scares me. I'm not scared of Willie Snead and Hollywood Brown and even Des Bryant. Shout out to him for being able to make a comeback.
Good for him coming back. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. And I know Duvernay has shown some flashes and done some things, but I think our secondary is so strong and so good that we really would be able to load the box and put like literally all 11 defenders in the box and then try and make Lamar complete a pass. But it is the matchup that I prefer the least, but not one that I'm like dreading and completely fearful of.
Sure. I think it makes sense.
And also with that's also part of my thinking, last thought on it here, of winning against Miami doesn't mean that we avoid Baltimore or avoid any particular matchup. All of these like options pretty much have a likely scenario coming in some form or fashion, whether we win or we lose, other than the Miami one, which you laid out earlier. And it's more important to be healthy, and to be healthy, a team that has been banged up like Baltimore, we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah. And, it's important to note, Sean McDermott is going to coach every single game he's involved in his entire life to win. I mean,
even if we play our backups, we're trying to win.
His daughter's T-ball game, there is nothing in him that would ever allow him to not try to win. And Brandon Beane has built one of the deepest rosters in the NFL. So everybody else, I'm pretty comfortable that the Bills can win against Miami. The tough part is there may not be a bigger drop-off in the NFL than from Josh Allen to Matt Barkley. Like it may legitimately be the biggest gap between starter and backup quarterback in the NFL. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know what they can do to be able to move that along. Miami's defense is good enough there that concerns me. But I do hope that we put up a couple points and then we get maybe a turnover or some fun stuff. So they're going to do everything in their power to go through. And I do agree with Lone Wolf that there will be some scoreboard watching, and that if Cleveland jumps out early at all on Pittsburgh, boom, everybody's out of the game.
Everybody go home.
Everybody's out of the game.
Leave the stadium. Also, ironically, you picked their comment from Lone Wolf earlier that I wanted to get to really quick about Miami. He threw a comment out there of obviously you can't rest every single starter that we have. So
mathematically, you actually can't. There are players who are going to have to play.
Yeah, not unless we're putting like Prohaska at. Actually, and I know I wouldn't even risk Prohaska because he's having a phenomenal punting season. And if you had to give priority to starters being rested, obviously we're throwing out Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White. I would think Edmonds, Milano, those type of starters are untouchable. Is there anyone that would be like an under the radar starter that people might not think of immediately that you'd be like, no, this guy needs to sit?
So Mitch Morris.
Yes.
Both linebackers,
Yes.
Milano and Edmonds. I usually do it in reverse of depth. So Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are critically important. We're pretty blessed to have guys like Jaquan Johnson and Dean Marlowe that not that they're equal, but they're so good. They're still NFL caliber players. Right. Spots where we really, so Josh and Trey White are 1A and 1B, where just when you remove them, it's a material difference in what's left. Sneaky one from Liam in the chat, Taron Johnson. That's a noticeable one at the corner spot, and then you get to the linebackers and Mitch Morris. Those are the big ones. I don't want to play Ty Nsekhe for a long stretch, but he's a serviceable NFL caliber player. Different pieces like that. Take some examples of guys who probably have to play. Ike Bakker's probably going to have to play a fair amount in this game. You're probably going to see some reps from Levi Wallace or Josh Norman, maybe a little bit from both. Some of those guys are going to have to play a bit. AJ Klein is going to have to play a bit. Guys that were, some of the defensive linemen, you're going to have to play some snaps. We don't have that many. We rotate so many that some of those guys still have to play to be able to take up the snaps to be able to do it. So they'll be able to be smart about it, but it's something to be able to go through.
That was literally my list. It's like you read my notes and then took it.
I'm very sneaky.
You are very sneaky. Yeah, that's the exact way to look at it. The reverse in terms of what depth do we have and who plays a vital, critical role that cannot be replicated and or plays a position where our depth overall is just not suitable enough to be sustained going forward long term. That's the answer there. And great question from Lone Wolf, a regular watcher of all things Cover One. Shout out to him.
Yeah, he's with us all the time. Appreciate it.
He is fantastic. We love him. And as we move on to the Cleveland Browns, 8 of the potential 32 first-round scenarios involve the Cleveland Browns. The most interesting one, and I want to say this before we get into Cleveland, I see the Bills, don't kill me, everyone. I see the Bills losing on Sunday to Miami. I also see, I'm not confident in Cleveland, but with Pittsburgh resting starters, I think you could very likely see the Cleveland Browns beating the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday. I
don't think it's crazy that I think that Cleveland could beat Pittsburgh with Pittsburgh starters.
That's also true. They've been playing so terribly. Yeah. But if Buffalo loses and Pittsburgh loses, and then Tennessee beats Houston, which seems like it could be a very likely thing, and if the Colts beat the Jags, which seems to be like it could be a pretty likely thing, and if the Ravens beat the Bengals, which again seems like it could be a pretty likely thing, that would lead to the Bills playing the Browns in the wild card round of the playoffs. So again, Bills lose, Steelers lose, Titans win, Colts win, Ravens win. That leads to a Bills-Browns first-round matchup. And based on how things are trending this week, I see that potentially being the most likely to me of first-round matchups for the Buffalo Bills.
I agree. So even though mathematically it's not necessarily the most likely, if you go by a true probability of what are the most likely, most probable lineups to be able to go through, it is to be able to match that up. So
they also do have some starters on the COVID list, as Anthony Romeo mentioned, including starting corner Denzel Ward, who is out for Week 17 and would probably be out
swapped. So I don't think it's as many anymore. I actually think in the same transaction they put Marcus Smith, one of their linebackers, and Denzel Ward on the list, but removed all 4 of the receivers off. So maybe there were a couple new ones put on yesterday or today, but I believe that it's swapped them, that all the receivers and tight ends came off and they put Denzel Ward and the other guy on there. And certainly, I mean, the Steelers have just historically destroyed the Browns. I'll say
Yes.
the Patriots also historically destroyed the Bills. So things change at some point. So at some point those things change.
Like Monday night.
I think by far the most likely scenario is the Bills host the Browns. I think that is the most likely scenario to play out. And it's similar. They're different. But some of the matchup things of what they do well are not necessarily our best thing. So a two-headed rushing attack with a really strong offensive line, if they were to get Teller back, if they got Wyatt Teller back on the line, and I know they had a couple other, Jedrick Wills was out. So if they get the line back and then have both Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb and have that two-headed running attack going, that hasn't been a great fit for us. And then you go with some of the play action hits. They do have some athletes at receiver. I think that they could put up points. I think that they could score some points on the Bills. Ultimately, their secondary has been a mess all season long. So it would come down to, can Myles Garrett and Olivier Vernon take over the game? If Myles Garrett could just take over the game and cause multiple strip sack fumble kind of things, they'd have a shot. But otherwise, eventually, that secondary just can't keep up with our receivers. And eventually we would outscore them. They have a slow, methodical ball control kind of offense. I think they could have some of those crazy 12-play drives and things like that. We'd get frustrated. People would be screaming on the internet about our run defense and all the things that go along with that.
We never got a one-tech.
Yes. I'd be getting yelled at about why we didn't trade for Tomlinson from the Giants. But eventually their secondary just is not in shape to keep up with our receivers. So I think at some point it would just be too much for them to keep up with. So I would rather play Baltimore than Cleveland, to be completely honest. I think I would rather do that. I have Cleveland and Tennessee as the two that, I think the Bills can beat every team, and then they can beat Kansas City. It's just going to be a coin flip of who has the best game against Kansas City. Yep. But if you're going to have a team that can do it for the Bills, it's going to be, we have weird turnovers, the other team gets a quick lead, and then they have a great running game that they can just milk the clock and try to keep the ball away from us. And in my mind, that would be Cleveland or Tennessee that could do that. I don't think it's likely. I wouldn't pick either of those things to happen, but they're the teams that if they had some good things go their way, a weird special teams turnover, a weird fluky fumble or tip ball interception or a pick six or something crazy like that, and then get a lead and then can lean on it with a good run game, those are the things that would concern me of the recipe that it would take for an upset against the Bills. And I think that they're the two teams that would be capable of it, even though I think the Bills would outscore both of them because their defenses just have been rough all season long.
Yeah, the run game aspect of Cleveland, it's my biggest fear overall with Baltimore as well. But Cleveland, their offensive line has been so strong. And just looking at their grade,
when healthy.
Yeah, when healthy. They have the second best run block grade. They're first in pass protection. Wyatt Teller, their guard play between Wyatt Teller and Joe Bitonio has been fantastic.
That show I was talking about, they had Brandon Thorne on, who's the best offensive line mind that I know. He had Teller as his first team guard, even though he didn't play 16 games. He's one of the few guys, he and Robert Mays both just, he's been phenomenal. It's been a phenomenal. And, we've talked about it lots of times. You can't unring that bell, the butterfly effect of things. Nobody was upset when the Bills traded him to the Browns. I'm not sad. I'm not frustrated. I'm happy for him. He was a good dude. But it's kind of rough to see a guy that used to be in a Bills uniform now play at an all-pro level, for another team.
But I hate that. I hate that hindsight vision of if we would have kept him, he would have been an all-pro. You cannot say that whatsoever. You don't know what clicked in his mind maybe from the trade or the better potential coaching or scenarios that set him up. You cannot say that if he stays in Buffalo, he ends up playing at the same level. But kudos to him. He's been having a great year. Conklin was a tremendous add to that offense. One of the best hires any team made this offseason was the Browns hiring Bill Callahan. Bill Callahan's one of the best offensive line coaches. Now that Dante Scarnecchia has retired, him and Mike Munchak are the two best offensive line coaches left. He is a huge reason that offensive line has come together that way. Yeah, and they've taken a big jump, and that's what the Cleveland offense has been. Baker, for the touchdown numbers that he's put up and the recency bias that we may have in our brains of, he's having a good year. He really hasn't. And the offense has clicked a bit more since Odell went out, unfortunately for Odell. And that running game, that's the only thing that worries me. Their offensive line is very strong. Chubb is fantastic.
Oh,
and then if you have
both
to
running
spell,
backs.
that's the thing. Like, I think Chubb is better than Hunt. But if you're spelling Chubb, you're spelling him with Kareem Hunt and vice versa, which is like, that's not like, it's not like you're going down.
Yeah, you're taking out the 4th best running back in the league and bringing in the 8th best running back in the league. It's ridiculous.
It's wild. They're outside weaponry, receivers, and even tight end to a degree. I like Njoku, and I don't mind Hooper, but their guys on the outside don't threaten me too much. I also still despise
I hate Jarvis Landry. I hate him.
Yep, I will always forever hate Jarvis Landry and will never root for him whatsoever. But yeah, if we played the Browns, it's coming down to what does their offense do against us, which i.e. how successful is their run game, and then on defense, whether or not Myles Garrett, for me, even more so than Vernon, whether Myles Garrett can just take over the game. I watched a breakdown. I don't remember who did it, and apologies for that. A breakdown of Myles Garrett on YouTube, and the bend, his speed rush bend that he does, the angle of which he bends his torso and dips and dives under. I feel like a dodgeball reference: dive, dip, duck, dive, dodge. And the way he gets around tackles to get to the quarterback, like the angle and speed at which he does it is almost like not possible according to the laws of physics. Almost like how Allen, according to math, was never going to be able to be accurate.
Yeah. You want to know who said he's the most physically gifted pass rusher since Bruce Smith?
Bruce Smith?
Bruce Smith said that. Bruce Smith said that he's the most physically talented pass rusher since Bruce Smith.
He's a monster.
It's unbelievable. So one, they're both from the same Virginia area. Bruce Smith is actually a mentor and is in Myles Garrett's life. Like, they spend time together. He's been a mentor for him since in the college days, pre-Browns. He did, he's just continued with him since he got to the Browns. He's the most physically gifted pass rusher in the NFL, I think he should be talked about in the way that Aaron Donald is talked about. He is unblockable. Like, you have to have a game plan for him the entire game. Now, I'm confident Brian Daboll, Sean McDermott, and our, brain trust, we would. And Lee Smith is the kind of player that when you're adding in potentially the best blocking tight end in the league, along with 2 good tackles, we can manage that. You can minimize that impact the same way we did with TJ Watt. The same, TJ Watt's a phenomenal player, and we neutralized him to a certain extent.
Yeah. Shout out to Garrett Williams for having a phenomenal game that game.
He made too much money that game.
Anytime he does something good, or Feliciano does something good, or Milano, I'm just like, damn, that cat's
going to cost so much money.
That's all I keep.
We'll get to that. We got plenty of shows to talk through that.
We do. We have plenty of shows to get through that. And yeah, that I see this being the most likely of matchups this coming out of week 17. And if we were to end up with Cleveland, again, pros and cons, much like the other matchups we have here, but I don't think it's anything to be tremendously fearful of, but they do have a potential recipe that could cause problems for us in that wild card matchup.
The way that I said it with Aaron on the preview show on Wednesday night is, the AFC doesn't have any Bears or Washington or Dallas making the playoffs. There's no easy outs in the AFC playoffs. Every single team that makes a team in the playoffs in the AFC is good and is going to have a good team that has the potential to upset any of the teams that they're playing in the first round. There are no guaranteed wins in the first round of the AFC playoffs. Nope. I think the Bills could be any of them. I think the Bills should be any of them. But no matter what, we're playing a good team. And no matter what, there's a double-digit win team that's not making the playoffs. Someone who has 10 or 11 wins isn't even making the playoffs in the AFC with adding a 7th spot. It's crazy how deep this AFC squad is this year.
It's nuts. 4 through 8 right now are all sitting there at 10-5, and in theory, they all could win. And you have an 11-5 team missing the playoffs, which is just
with the 7th spot added, not just regular. That's rare historically with 6 spots, let alone adding a 7th spot, and the 8th best team is going to have 10 or 11 wins. It's crazy.
And it's so funny to see that juxtaposition of adding that spot and then knowing like the AFC has that, and then the NFC is going to have a just garbage NFC East,
literally a losing record, and
and not even just like a losing record team that's like, well, there's some caveats to that. No, they're just like a bad football team. Well, I guess Dallas, you could be like, well, no, because even before Dak went down.
No, they were so losing. And even beyond that, and then some of the other teams, you might have John Wolford for the Rams at quarterback, and you might have all kinds of other messes. So, that's going to be a cakewalk that, it's going to be Green Bay versus Tampa or New Orleans. It's going to be one of the three of them that comes through. But unfortunately, we have to go through a little more of a gauntlet.
A little bit more of a gauntlet, but unfortunately,
who's next in that gauntlet?
He beat me to it. I swear you're reading sneaky. My notes and in my brain. You are sneaky. Plus, you have a camera in my house, which I know, and I'm oddly comfortable with.
It's part of the deal. Joining the team. When you want to join the Cover One squad, you got to give
we
up
have to film everything about you. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts. Only 3 of the 32 potential scenarios going into this weekend lead to the Bills facing the Colts in the first round. This is an interesting one for me because they have such a tremendous amount of studs on their defense. Darius Leonard, awesome. Buckner, awesome. Okereke, awesome. I definitely studied how to say his name to make sure that I would be correct. And I shouldn't because I had the Colts in fantasy and I appreciated them. I feel like I underappreciated them to a degree. Autry coming off the other side of Buckner is a good weapon. Houston coming off the edge is good. Rocky Sin has had a really good year. Xavier Rhodes has had a bounce-back year at corner for the Colts compared to how he looked for Minnesota. Their defense is solid, but I do not fear that offense, especially in a potential colder weather playoff game and stick in the mud. Phillip Rivers is just sitting back there behind that line, and that line, Anthony Costanzo, their standout left tackle, he's done for the year. They still have Quentin Nelson, who's a solid piece on that line, but I don't think they have the weaponry to test the Bills' defense. I recognize the speed that T.Y. Hilton has and how he's played over the last several weeks, but you're looking at a receiving core of T.Y., Zach Pascal, and Michael Pittman Jr., and maybe like Trey Burton or an injured Jack Doyle at tight end. I like Jonathan Taylor and Hines in their combo, but I'm not fearful of overall the matchup on either side of the ball. If we ended up in a scenario facing the Colts in the first round, with a potential one being if we somehow beat the Miami Dolphins this weekend and the Steelers lose. So Bills win, Steelers lose, Tennessee wins, Indianapolis wins, Baltimore wins. We would play the Colts in the first round. And
so it's basically all the most likely scenarios with assuming the Bills rest starters are backups beating the Dolphins. So if all the normal expected stuff happens and the Bills, practice squad beats the Dolphins, we would play the Colts. That would be, it's actually kind of similar in the sense of what we talked about, that the Browns is not statistically the most likely matchup or most probable matchup, but from a reality standpoint, this is one that, yes, there's only, what'd you say, 3 scenarios where this one pans out, but one of them is actually one of the more likely scenarios. It's not that crazy of one that could happen. So playing the Colts, even though it's only 3 out of 32 scenarios, it's actually one of the more plausible ones that we could see. And I think they're the knockoff TJ Maxx version of the Browns. Like they got a 2-headed running back. They got a quarterback that can only fling it when they have play action, but just doesn't really scare you. They have some receivers, but not like terrifying weapons that are going to take it away. They're maybe flip-flopped a little on defense, but similar where, they got DeForest Buckner, who if he has just an amazing game and takes over the game, that could be a problem. But then they have some holes at spots in the secondary and are beatable. So I think they're maybe a little bit more talented in the secondary than Cleveland, and have another good offensive line. Similar, the Colts have a very good offensive line. So, there's our recipe where I could see them upsetting it. But if, whatever, you talk about the not understanding the physics of how like Phillip Rivers kind of like flings his body to get the ball to go downfield. If the Bills lose to whatever incarnation that is, I will be very upset.
I'd lose it. Yeah, I just don't see, especially after what we saw the Bills do against the San Francisco 49ers, that really put into focus how well Josh Allen can really do when given oodles of time to just sit back. The Colts, they're 31st in blitz percentage in the NFL. They only blitz 17% of the time, and they're 17th in the league in sacks. Granted, some of that is due to the injuries they've had up front. Buckner's been hurt, Autry, Leonard, and so on and so forth. But
I think they're getting relatively healthy right now.
They are. They've gotten better and they've gotten healthier, but I've seen them, and again, I followed them to a pretty decent degree, having them in fantasy. They've gotten a lot of timely takeaways and a lot of timely, I don't want to say not sustainable plays, but I'm going to say it, not sustainable things that happen. I think they're a good defense, but I don't think they match up well with what the Bills do. And if we were to draw the Colts in the first round, much to your point, and I just don't see that being a game where I'm like, okay, I'm tremendously worried. I think we can get Rivers off the spot and mess up the offense. And then on defense, I don't think they're a good matchup for what we do on offense.
I think they'd win a game in the NFC playoffs, and in the AFC, they'd probably be my number 2 pick behind Miami. They'd probably be the team I'd second most like to play. I just think they're beatable. I think that they don't match up well with what we have, and I think that we could manage what they do well, and that, I'm sure Taylor or Hines would break off a big play. I don't think we're going to run out there shutting teams out or anything like that. No. We're going to give up some points. It's just I think we're going to outscore them, and I feel comfortable we'd outscore Indy.
Yeah, same here, same page. And again, like the key caveat for me with that is, again, only 3 of the 32 scenarios lead to the Colts, but the one that we mentioned, again, may not be mathematically probable, but when you're looking at trending things and how the teams match up, it is one that is pretty decently likely to come out.
I'll actually say, I think right now, depending on where you're looking, for some reason, most sports books in Vegas still have the Bills favored, which gives me a little glimmer of hope that the Bills are going to play their starters maybe a little longer than I think and are going to try to smoke Miami pretty good. So technically, if you went through and just picked the Vegas favorite to win every game, this would be the outcome. So if Vegas pegged every game right and the Vegas favorite won every game as of right now, this would be the outcome.
Oh, that's a fun fact. Yeah. And then I would be happy with that outcome. Yeah. I'm very comfortable playing Indianapolis in the first round. Last but not least of the potential first round matchups for the Buffalo Bills is the Tennessee Titans. Much like the Colts, only 3 of the 32 first round scenarios lead to the Titans for the Buffalo Bills. And I just don't see this one likely happening, but just in case it were to happen, because again, the NFL, the amount of parity has been crazy. It's a week-to-week league. You never know what can happen. Their defense has been leaky. They've given up so many yards and points, but to your point you mentioned earlier in the show, that team is all Derrick Henry, and we watched what the Titans did last year. Granted, their defense was better going into the playoffs last year and played at a better level in the playoffs, but Derrick Henry is able to literally put a team on his entire back. And again, we talk about the Bills' run defense, and Derrick Henry, the type of runner that just gets stronger as the season goes on, stronger as the game goes on. When you're more winded in the third and fourth quarter, he's still, 6'9", 2,000 pounds, running through the gaps and taking it outside. It's a matchup that, again, I'm not sitting.
He's matchup proof.
Yeah,
he is matchup proof.
He can bust one off at any time. Fantasy football will tell you that. And this, again, is another matchup that, to your point earlier, Greg, I don't think we're sitting here thinking like, oh, man, we can't beat Tennessee. We most definitely can, but it's a matchup that you would rather have other matchups than have this one against Tennessee in the first round.
So the good news is Tennessee probably has the worst defense of any team, maybe in the playoffs, because they had one of the worst defenses in the league, let alone being 10-5 or whatever they are right now. So if you want to talk about the plausible scenario for them, again, there's not very many, but the one is all the things we said for the Colts. So all the Vegas favorites win except Deshaun Watson upsets the Titans, which is not that crazy. So if all the Vegas favorites win, and then Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans beat the Titans, which if you want to root for something and you want to hurt the Dolphins draft pick a little bit to knock them from like the number 3 or number 4 pick down to like the 6th or 7th pick, root for Houston to upset Tennessee. And that would invite Tennessee coming to Buffalo if the rest of the things held right.
Which also isn't the craziest thing. We saw what J.J. Watt said after last week. Maybe the Texans come out and are super pumped up and fired up, and they could potentially knock off Tennessee in this game.
For sure. So it would actually come down to, say that the Bills backups and Matt Barkley plus the practice squad can't beat the Dolphins, and then that upset happened from Deshaun Watson, it would actually knock Tennessee out of the playoffs, which is hysterical. So the only caveat to any concern with the Titans is that all the stuff I said earlier about the Browns with the, if you're going to design a recipe of, hey, what does a Bills upset look like? It would be ball control, weird turnovers, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then you add in, I've seen the Titans do it. I've seen the Titans beat the Bills. I've seen the Titans go on a playoff run. I don't think they're playing great right now. I think their defense is too much to overcome. I don't think there's any chance they go on a run in the playoffs because their defense at some point will simply get shredded by someone.
Yeah, they're still
but it's impossible to say that, the Titans can't beat the Bills, because I watched them beat the Bills. It was a weird scenario. It was having a game plan for two teams and a team game that got moved 3 times and all the weird stuff that happened. But I watched them beat the Bills, and I watched the Titans go on a playoff run last year, beating Tom Brady, almost upsetting Kansas City, all the things that went along with it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any of those things are likely or going to happen. But, I think that maybe they're my least likely. The team I would want to play the least is Tennessee, just because I can't remove it from my brain that I've seen those things happen, so I know they're possible.
Do you think the potential of Trey White in this game versus not having him the first time we played Tennessee, do you think that sways you a little bit more to feeling a bit more confident?
Sure. I mean, everything that's going on now gives me confidence in being able to do that, because you're talking about, the hottest team in the NFL. Everything is clicking right for the Bills. Obviously, we're hoping there's not weird, drizzly, nasty weather. We also didn't have Matt Milano for that game. So having Milano and Trey White both back, having everybody else ready to roll, it's just something that just weird stuff that took place in that game. I don't think if the Bills played to the Titans 10 times, I think the Bills win 7 or 8 of them. It just happens that the one was the weird one that got out of hand and had a bunch of weird turnovers. And, for anybody who thinks that game was a blowout in that sense,
that's what I was going to say. Yep.
That game was, 21-10 with the Bills driving to score a touchdown to bring it back 21-17, and then had the weird turnover returned back, and then had back-to-back turnovers on, ensuing plays and all the weirdness that went into it. But I respect them in the fact that I think Mike Vrabel's a good coach. I think that they have a dangerous weapon in Derrick Henry. I think Ryan Tannehill in a positive game script is a very good, people use front runner like an insult. I just mean it in the sense of when they're out front, he's really good in that role where you're expecting him to hand off and then he can pull it back and hit AJ Brown down the field. Yep. AJ Brown is the kind of matchup that gives our cornerbacks trouble, like a phenomenal athlete, like a DK Metcalf kind of guy that just, we don't have the guys to match up with that. Mm-hmm. So, I feel very comfortable that we would beat Tennessee, but they would actually be my last choice of any of the teams that I'd want to play in the first round.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'm iffy on Tennessee. I don't want to play them because of what you mentioned, the pedigree aspect, knowing that I watched them go to the AFC Championship last year, and I know the confidence they have in their ability to turn it on and do things that are not only good for them, but that are difficult for the Bills based on matchup. And your point on A.J. Brown was spot on. For as good as our Buffalo secondary is, and for as good as Trey White is, tremendous technique, both in his hands and his feet and his hips, but we do not have the overall athleticism and physical dominance in a secondary that exists in someone like A.J. Brown, who is big and strong and fast and can be technical as well. It is an interesting matchup piece for the Bills coming against the Titans. But again, I just feel like this one won't happen, and I feel like now that I'm saying that, I'm going to jinx it into the universe, and now we're going to play Tennessee in the first round.
Very obviously your fault.
And I would blame myself. But I think an excellent point that you mentioned, I wanted to highlight the Tennessee loss, much like the KC loss, honestly, as well. For as much as they were losses, I think they were overblown to a degree. Granted, a loss is a loss, and you can play that game of, well, if this didn't happen, I don't like to do that. But those games were not as out of hand as people like to make it seem. And even with the Kansas City game of Clyde Edwards-Helaire running all over us, and the Tennessee game with the final score, the Bills were very much in those games in weird weeks, weird game scripts, injuries, weather, a lot of weird things going on, and they really weren't outclassed too much. So to be able to see some semblance of revenge extracted against Tennessee in the first round of the playoffs would bring me a decent amount of joy, but maybe not too much, maybe just a little bit. Because
I like it. I support being petty at all times.
Yeah, you are the Prince of Petty or whatever you label yourself as on Twitter. I never remember.
Ambassador. I'm an ambassador of petty. I represent it to all nations.
That's fair. To all nations. Man, I didn't realize you were so global. I got to step my game up. I'm just local. Not really out there yet. That will bring us to the end of Disguise coverage here. As you can see on the graphic here, Toodles, you guys. This is my favorite part of every episode. I love the phrase Toodles. It brings me joy. I don't know why it makes me giggle like small. Yeah, I think I appreciate you. And I like you for liking it. That's what we are here. We're a team, family. I appreciate you, Greg, for coming on the show and being on this episode of Disguise coverage. Why don't you let the good people of this episode who are watching this episode know where they can find you and what you do?
Sure. Come and find me at Greg Tompsett, GregTompsett. Always having fun in the Cover One Slack channel, on the Twitters, all the different places. You could find me and Aaron Quinn on the Cover One preview and post-game show. This week, we're actually probably going to postpone the post-game show until later to 7 o'clock to be able to see what the 4 o'clock games are, to know who the matchup is. If we know the matchup coming out of the 4 o'clock games, we may simply roll with it. But if we don't know the matchup yet, we're probably going to hold off and do it a little bit later. So we'll see where that's going as the game rolls on. But always having fun on Twitter with all of the fun Bills fans. So come and find me there, and we'll keep having a great time.
That's a great point there by Greg. The Cover One Buffalo podcast with Greg and Aaron is top-notch stuff. The things that they do for the previews going into the game, the post-game show is tremendous. Check that out if you are not already checking that out. Follow Greg. He's a great follow. He's a pretty much likable know-it-all, as his bio says. I am Anthony, of course, your regular host here on Disguise Coverage. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro2_ANT. I want to sincerely thank everyone for riding with Greg and I on this episode, whether you are listening later, watching live now, watching the video stream, the audio only, whatever. Every single listen, view, download, however you want to categorize it, is tremendously appreciated. We're thankful for all that. Thank you to everyone who rode with us live on this episode. The comments were blowing up. The chat was great. I wish we could have gotten to literally every single comment that came through. We appreciate all of them. Have a good start to your new year, everyone. Hope you and your friends and family and loved ones are all staying safe. You guys are having a good start to your year and a good 2021 as a whole. Go Bills, and we'll see you next week.
Go Bills.